And I've always favored minimalism, not just for the aesthetic, but for the control it grants over one's environment. In my apartment, everything has its place. Every piece of furniture is pushed flush against the wall. There are no shadow harbors here, no messy corners or piles of laundry where the mind can play tricks. When you keep a space this sterile, you notice when the air changes, you notice the slightest deviation in the geometry. Most people think of horror as something external, but real horror is intimate. It's about the proximity of something that shouldn't be there. In 2008, in Fukuoka, Japan, a man lived alone for a year, wondering why his food was vanishing and why he felt watched. He eventually installed security cameras. What he found wasn't a ghost, it was a woman. She'd been living in the top shelf of his closet for 12 months, sliding out only when he was out or asleep. The most disturbing part wasn't her presence, it was the space she occupied, a shelf so narrow that the police couldn't believe a human could fit. It makes you wonder, if a person can hide in a cupboard, what exactly can fit in the spaces that are too small for us to even see? It started with a coin. It was a heavy silver piece, a keepsake from my grandfather that I usually kept on the kitchen counter. I was cleaning last Tuesday using an industrial citrus cleaner to keep the surfaces reflective when I accidentally swept it off the edge. It didn't hit the floor with a ring. It slipped perfectly into the 2mm gap beneath the fixed kitchen cabinets. I knelt down, expecting to see it just an inch or two inside, but the darkness under there was absolute. I grabbed a flashlight and a metal measuring tape. When I clicked the light on, the beam just seemed to be swallowed by the gap. It didn't reflect off the back wall. I pushed the tip of the measuring tape into the crack. It should have hit the drywall at 4 inches. That's the depth of the cabinet base. But it didn't stop. I unspooled it. 6 inches, 10 inches, 2 feet. The tape just kept sliding into the darkness, making that dry, rhythmic click-click-click sound against the floorboards. I reached the 5-foot mark on the tape before I stopped. My kitchen isn't 5 feet deep. Behind that cabinet should be solid concrete. But as far as the tape was concerned, the void under my kitchen was expanding. The internal dimensions of my safe space had been compromised by a hole that had no end. That night, the sounds began. It wasn't a bang or a thump. It was the sound of friction. Imagine a large sheet of heavy sandpaper being slowly dragged through the interior of your walls. It was a dry, scratching sound, the sound of skin rubbing against drywall. It started at 3 a.m. near the baseboards and moved upward, toward the ceiling, then back down again. I told myself it was just the building settling, but I knew the rules of my house had changed. I developed protocols to keep the panic at bay. Don't look at the gaps. Don't shine your phone light into the slivers between the doors. If you don't acknowledge the thinning of the world, maybe it won't notice you. But then I found the hair. I was opening the refrigerator when I saw it. A single, long strand caught in the rubber seal. It was black, coarse, and impossibly long, like it had been pulled from a drain. But it wasn't in the sink. It was caught in the one place I assumed was airtight. I pulled on it, and I felt a slight resistance, like something was holding on to the end within the insulation of the fridge. I didn't finish pulling it out. I cut it with scissors and walked away. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, smelling of wet copper and old, undisturbed dust. I realized then that she wasn't just in the walls. She was becoming part of the appliances, part of the furniture, part of the very structure I used to call home. Curiosity eventually outweighs fear. It's a flaw in our biology. We have to see the thing that's killing us. Last night, I finally looked. I didn't look under the cabinet or into the closet. I looked behind the mirror in my bedroom, the one place where there's a gap of less than half an inch. I took a small hand mirror and angled it so I could see into the sliver of space behind the glass. At first, there was nothing but the gray of the wall. Then the shadows shifted. I saw a face, but it wasn't a face that made sense. It was stretched vertically, the features distorted as if they'd been pressed between 2 sheets of glass. The skin was yellowed and tight like parchment over bone. There were no eyelids. There couldn't be. There wasn't enough room in that half-inch of space for her to blink. She was just fitted into the gap. Her body was compressed into a thickness that shouldn't allow for internal organs or a heartbeat. She was two-dimensional, a living shadow that had found a way to exist in the margins of my life. Our eyes locked through the reflection. She didn't move, she didn't scream. She just stared with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. She'd been waiting for that moment of recognition. She wasn't hiding from me. She was waiting for me to acknowledge that she belonged there, and in that silence I realized she was thinner than she had been the day before. The Sukima-onna, the gap woman, doesn't need your house. Once you've seen her, she exists in the very concept of a gap. Now, I see them everywhere. The hairline fracture in the ceiling, the space between the floorboards, the sliver of darkness between the tiles in the shower. I can feel her presence expanding. There's a phantom itch in the back of my throat, as if something thin and dry is sliding just behind my tongue, occupying the space between my teeth. When I close my eyes, I can feel her in the tiny gap behind my eyelids. She is the shadow in your peripheral vision that disappears when you turn your head. She is the reason you feel a cold draft in a room with no windows. Be careful when you go to bed tonight. Don't look too closely at the space between your mattress and the wall. And whatever you do, if you see a sliver of an eye watching you from the dark, don't acknowledge it. Because once you know she can fit anywhere, you will never truly be alone again. Good night.